Oh, forgot. Great. Good evening. Thank you much, everybody, for joining us for the third of our series of webinars on school governance. And as Chair of the Education Committee for the Worshipful Company of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, delighted that you're joining us this evening. We may be a small group this evening, but actually what's really important is that we capture what our speakers are saying, because we very often find that really with these things, it's actually the recordings afterwards which are sought after by people, and which we are trying to develop into a resource for as many people as possible to use in coming weeks and months. So I think that is as important as anything. Without further ado, I am going to hand it over for this evening to our facilitator, Anne Punter, one of our liverymen of the Worshipful Company, who will introduce our two other speakers, and then we'll go into, as time allows, some questions and answers and discussion. But in the first instance, over to you. Thank you so much, Anne.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sheila. Just to contextualise this evening, I'd just like to briefly say that seminars 1 and 2 covered perspectives of governors in school and also head teachers. And the role of governance was identified as being really inextricably linked in the values that need to be employed to the Nolan principles, with which you're probably familiar. And also of interest because very closely linked to the values research that David Locke is heading up for our company, which links to our motto, which is service with integrity. So that's where we're coming from. Now, this evening, we're widening the focus even further with James de Samares, who is our immediate past master. And he is going to talk about what the role of being the chair of governors in an independent secondary school is all about. And following his presentation, we're going to just have a little bit of a sort of interview on how he can see that relates to being on a board of a company, a corporate board. Because James has experience of that as well. And then we may pause for a moment and see if there are any questions from our other listeners before we go on to Emma, who is the vice chair of a trust board, a multi-academy trust board, which we all call a MAT. And so rather like James, is in a very senior and important position in governing that school or that conglomerate of schools. And Emma is also the impact and projects manager for Governors for Schools. So and has been a teacher. So in several ways is really an expert across the whole spectrum of what we're talking about. And Emma is going to talk about being the vice chair of a multi-academy trust, and also then just have a little exploration into, or we will when we talk, a little exploration into how that relates to the local governing bodies that are the individual schools within the trust. So I'm going to hand over to James, who now is going to talk about being the chair of governors of an independent school. So James, please.
Well, hopefully you can all see my slides, and good evening, and very nice to see you all. I'm not going to, fortunately, I'm not going to tell you everything about what it's involved in being a chair of governors, but I'm going to focus on the governance aspects of being chair of governors specifically. Obviously, there's a much wider range of activities the chairs get involved in that we could spend all evening discussing, but I think we're just going to focus in on governance and see where we are. This is me. The thing I'd like to just mention here is, as I'm a retired director of an investment management company, where my role actually was director and head of investment trusts and investment companies. So I spent most of my career looking after boards of directors, helping boards of directors, and facilitating the actions of boards of directors of investment management, of investment trust companies or investment companies. So that's where my very broad governance background from that. And as well as being chair of governors at Queenswood School, which, as Anne said, is an independent school, I was in the past a governor of a state secondary school in Enfield, Bishop Stopford School. So moving on, this is a bit grandmother teaching to suck eggs, I suspect, but I don't think it ever does any harm to remind ourselves what governance actually is. And this is the Chartered Governance Institute definition of governance, and it applies to schools, in my view, just as much as it applies to any commercial or charitable organisation. So, you know, organisations are organisations. All organisations need governance, and literally it is as simple as that. Now, in terms of school governance, I think there are some key points that are well worth keeping firmly in your mind when you're thinking about governance within schools. First of all, the Board of Governors is all non-executive. I regret to say I've seen examples of where governors get much too involved in the day-to-day running of the school. That is actually not what they're there to do. But I have seen it happen, and I think it's really very important in school governance that governors recognise they are non-executive, they are not executive. The head teacher is the chief executive officer of the school, and that applies whether it's a state school or an independent school. One of the things to bear in mind about that, which is really, really important, is, of course, the head teacher is an education professional. It's a qualified teacher who's the head teacher, and they probably haven't got a business, finance, legal or property management background. They won't know about all these sort of business activities. Whereas one would hope that most of the governors, there will be governors who are education professionals, but most of the governors may well be, will not be education professionals, but maybe business, finance, legal or property management professionals. And this is where the relationship between the head teacher and the senior leadership team within the school and the governors becomes very important, because that collaboration of skills is really, really important to having a successfully run school. And so consequently, it is critically important that the head teachers and the senior leadership team and the governors have a highly collaborative and supportive relationship based on mutual respect. This is really, really important. And like any business, the school's values and ethos must underpin the governance framework. And we will talk a little bit about values and ethos within schools, because values and ethos in schools differentiate different schools. And that's actually quite important for parents and others who are looking at the school and trying to decide which school is most appropriate for their child. But underneath that, there is a core ethos and value that all schools should share, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. And of course, the governance framework within the school, like the governance framework of any organisation, needs to be robust, and it needs to be constantly challenged and tested by governors, as non-executive directors would do, one would hope, within any sort of commercial company. School aims. I mean, I think this is really the heart of the matter, because this is absolutely at the heart of everything schools do. And I think it's really, really important that everybody recognises this and that it's at the forefront of mind. Students must be and feel safe. Really, really important for governors to be constantly checking, constantly testing that actually the students in the school feel safe. Students must have a voice. They must be able to talk, say what they like, what they don't like, what their views are. Having a voice is just terribly, terribly important and for governors need to hear what that voice is actually saying and should be checking to do it. Clearly, every student should achieve to the best of their ability. No school can make a child cleverer than it actually is, but what it can do is enable that child to achieve to the best of their ability, and all schools should be having that as an aim. And I think, something that I don't think is talked about a lot around schools is, I think one of the key aims for every school is that that their students should be able to find the best version of themselves. And by that, I sort of mean I sort of mean that it's growing up the right way. I think it's the best way I would look at it. One would hope at the end of their school life you know, they've found the best version of themselves, and that's the version that they take out into the wider world, whether it's further education or straight into work. And that's, I think that's really important. So I think school governance should be seeking to deliver this. Obviously, the head teacher and the whole academic staff and everybody within the school are trying to achieve it as well. But it's important that the governors are focused on that, recognise the school aims, and share those with the head teacher. So in terms of the principles of governance, Anne mentioned the Nolan 7 Principles of Public Life, which I think are really important, and things that, you know, having been an elected representative in the past, I'm very aware of the 7 Principles of Public Life. And I think what's interesting is a lot of independent schools, and Queenswood is one of them, is actually a charitable foundation. And so I think the Charity Governance Code is an equally interesting area to identify the principles that of governance that should underpin a school. And what I've done there is put them alongside each other, and in red I've shown the principles that are exactly the same. So you've got integrity and leadership, for example. I mean, integrity is at the heart of all governance, and it's jolly nearly a value for every organisation and probably for every school. I mean, integrity is terribly important. And of course, good leadership is at the heart of all successful organisations. You know, the number of organisations we've seen fail have failed because of poor leadership. And leadership is absolutely fundamental to success. And governors should be making sure that the head teacher is providing that leadership, that the senior leadership team are providing that leadership, and that everyone understands, buys into, and you can see that good leadership spreading through the school, because the school's the same as a business. You know, it's top down. So really, really important to get that right. So also the other sort of commonality there, openness and accountability on both sides, really, really important. You know, staff and governors, you know, need to be accountable, and we can talk a bit about accountability in a minute, because that's actually something I think is quite interesting in schools. But, you know, decisions that are taken need to be open, they need to be transparent, and everybody needs to understand them and how they got to where they are. So you know, it's important that organisations, in terms of, you know, openness and accountability, you celebrate your successes, of course you do, but you also recognise your failures and the learnings from those failures. That's what openness is about. That's what accountability is about. I think that's important. And then the other ones are the ones that are sort of slightly slightly different, but they all relate. And what I find terribly interesting is I look at the Charity Governance Code, I look at the Nolan 7 Principles, and I actually think all of them apply to schools. So actually all those principles apply to schools, and I think they're all really, really important. So let's move on a little bit to the governing body composition. So hang on, have I gone too, no, excuse me, just a second, I've overshot by a little bit too fast. There we go, I'm back on the right one. So school ethos and values. School ethos and values, these are really personal to the school a little bit. I mentioned this earlier on. I think they're critical in differentiating one school from another school sometimes. But like any organisation with good governance, the values drive the governance framework and ultimately the success of the schools. But I think an awful lot of schools are not very good at talking about their ethos and their values. And I think it's really, really refreshing when that happens. And I'm going to quickly switch over and let you listen to a short podcast that the head teacher at Queenswood, the school I'm chair of governors of, made at the beginning of the year, which actually touched on the whole issue of ethos and values. And I'd like to say she did this without talking to me about it first. So she didn't do it because I prompted it. She did it because she thought it was the right thing to do at that time. So have a listen to this.
Hello, and I would like to wish everyone in the Queenswood community a happy and healthy time. As we look forward to what the new year will bring, I'm delighted to share with you some of the main areas of focus coming up. As parents of Year 11s and Year 13s will know, we're right in the middle of mock exams. Although this can be a stressful time for students and their parents, It's an essential part of preparation for the public exams taking place in the summer. I know that my staff are there to support the students with feedback and help to ensure that they achieve the very best results they can in their GCSEs and A-levels. Supporting and nurturing our students is at the heart of everything that we do. Central to this idea, both academically and pastorally, are our ethos and aims. I'm bringing this theme to the fore for all our students this year. We have already had an assembly about culture in which we explored the importance of pupil voice and how our school aims are lived out at Kew. Core to our culture are some simple and powerful values. As a Methodist Foundation school with a Christian ethos, we challenge ourselves to learn, live and work together in kindness, honesty, integrity and accountability. This embeds a culture of service to others, encouraging pupils to think not only of their own needs, but of what they can contribute to society. Under the leadership of our new chaplain, Kate Douglas, our involvement with charities has gathered pace, and the girls are doing some wonderful work in this area. A vital part of our culture is to ensure that our students have ways of expressing their views about their school, to make suggestions, to speak up when things don't seem quite right for themselves or their peers. Pupil voice is therefore a big area of focus for me and my team, and we're putting in place many ways to encourage the students to come forward with ideas and views. I want them to understand that we will consider their thoughts seriously and provide reasons for our decisions to adopt their ideas, or if we are unable, to explain fully why. I do hope that as parents and guardians, you will support the students and encourage them to take the time to understand the aims and ethos of Kew and to speak up whenever they wish to be heard. It has been a wonderful start to the spring term, and I look forward to meeting with you all again soon at various events in school.
Right. Well, I mean, I hope you found that that interesting. But for me, what I think is really, really important here is this is the head teacher making an appeal to parents and guardians fundamentally to buy into the values and support their children in adopting and living by those values. And it's also interesting that the Kew principles values that she identified in the podcast are entirely consistent with the Nolan principles and the Charity Commission principles, except for one, and that one is kindness. And I think that's a really, really interesting thing that differentiates perhaps a school from a business, because actually Queenswood is known as a kind school. And actually, if there's one thing that this world is short of sometimes, it's kindness. And children can be desperately unkind to each other. It is just something that kids do. And so having a value that very much expresses that isn't the way that we behave in the school, that actually we do want people to be kind to each other, is I think really, really important. So, you know, that's an example of values, if you like, in action, trying to drive the way in which a school works. Why are values important? Well, the soft reasons are obvious, but and reflected really in that podcast you've just seen. But these are the business reasons. You know, I mean, integrity should be a key value for all organisations. Values embraced and lived create trust between the school, the parents, and the students. Integrity and all values must be embraced by everyone in the school and reflected in all its policies to inspire the right behaviours. Trust encourages parents and students to support the school, be advocates for the school, which is really important. And brand applies to schools as much as it does businesses. You know, schools have brands. They sometimes they don't realise it, but they have. And some of them actually focus on building and working on them. And I think they're really important. So a good brand will always ensure a school is full or as close to full as it can be. And I always remind people that if you're talking about brand, a brand is a promise that's kept. So whatever, you know, you want people to think about your school, whatever you want your brand to be, you've actually got to live it and deliver it. Otherwise, you will lose everything. So moving on to the governing body, and I think that's actually quite an important thing, is I think it's really important with a governing body of a school that the governing body must be diverse, as any board would be in the commercial world. And I think it should reflect the ethnic and gender makeup of the school. It doesn't have to completely reflect the makeup and gender of the school, because if that was the case, I wouldn't be the chair of governors at Queenswood, because it's a single-sex girls' school. But what we do have is we have more, I think, lady governors than we do male governors as of next term. And you know, we are slightly more diverse. I think that as a school we ought to have an Afro-Caribbean governor. We haven't found one as yet, but we'd like to find one, because that would just match the gender makeup, the ethnic makeup of the school. And school governing bodies, and this is something I focus on very much as the chair, must have a good mix of skills and experience. You know, skills matrices are just as important in schools as they are in any other business, because you know, it's absolutely crucial that the head teacher and the senior leadership team get the support they need across the spectrum of the activities of the school, over and above education, but including education as well, of course. I think, you know, parent governors can be very effective. I think all schools should have parent governors. Parents buy into the school. They love the school. You know, it's crucial. All governors love the school. It's very difficult, in my view, for someone to be an effective governor if they don't love the school. I think, you know, you've got to want the school to succeed. You want to be passionate about it. You need to buy into the vision the head teacher has for it. But skills is a crucial one. And so when you're looking for a new governor, you need to make sure you've got the skills on the board you need. And what I've done in this slide is just list out those areas of skill that I have in mind. I like to tick all these boxes across my different governors, so that whatever's going on in the school, I've got somebody who can help the head teacher, help the senior leadership team to solve the problem. So education, marketing, fundraising, because we're an independent school, finance, information technology, risk and control, facilities, property management, legal, human resources. I mean, all of these things really, really important. And then you've got your parent governors, who may cover some of this, as well as being a parent and can represent parental views to you. And for some schools, they'd have foundation governors as well, if they're schools with Faith Foundation or whatever else. And I think that's all fine as well. In summary, let me just slide up. There we go. In summary, it's quite simply, you know, the governance of schools is, in my view, broadly similar to the governance of commercial and charitable organisation, but slightly different. But it is broadly similar. School governors, you must remember, school governors are not running the school. They are non-executives. School governance supports the key aims of the school. Fairly self-evident that. The key principles for school governance are wide-ranging. We've looked at 2 codes of principles, and actually, you know, my view is all of them apply to schools, so you'd apply them across the thing. School values and ethos define a school and determine, in my view, whether or not it's a success. If it's got the right values and the right ethos, and it lives those values and lives that ethos, it will be a successful school. And the governing body needs to support the head teacher and senior leadership team with a good matrix of skills to support all areas of the school's operations. So that, in summary, is I think what I'd like to say as about governance as a chair of governors. So, Anne.
Thank you so much, James. I'm very impressed, and I guess Emma is too, about the fact that you run your governing body based on a skills audit for the composition of the governing body. It may seem obvious to you that should happen, but it wasn't until 2000 that a white paper specified that management skills had to be part of the composition of state schools. So you're very much focused on what is important in terms of an audit for making sure those skills are covered. And that's actually the basis. I said Emma would be very pleased, because that's the basis upon which Governors for Schools identifies governors in order that they can be placed appropriately in state schools. So The particular question, though, I thought we could explore with you, because you were already making comparisons between corporate governance and school governance. And you said, well, both have brands, both have sort of non-executive directors. The governors in an independent school are non-executive directors. Kindness isn't particularly specified on the corporate governance code. But I wonder how closely do you see the similarities between a board of governors on an independent school, which is a business, and a corporate governor's job as a non-executive director?
Well, I think it's a very, very interesting question, and the answer is they're the same yet very different. If I can say that, the Board of Governors ensure the organisation, that is the school, delivers on its aims and objectives, complies with all necessary regulations, and all whilst avoiding conflicts of interest, which is really, really important on any board, is to avoid conflicts of interest. And then we talked about the diverse mix and skills. In that sense, what you're trying to do as a board of governors of a school and what you're trying to do as the board of directors of a commercial company, I don't think are very different. But there are major differences that are worth dwelling on just for a second. The first is accountability, because in a commercial business, fundamentally, the board of directors are accountable to the shareholders. Now, who are the shareholders in the case of a school? Because actually the interesting thing is that if you go to a commercial company, loads of them will tell you that we put customers first. You know, whether they do or not doesn't matter. They say we put customers first. Actually, in a school, the students are put first, but probably the customers are the parents. So you've got this differing stakeholder that you've got to actually sort of manage a little bit. So there isn't, and actually the truth is it's very difficult for the parents and the students to get upset with the governors and hold them accountable and say this is dreadful and, you know, what are you doing? It's much more difficult to complain about that than you'd think. So I think accountability is very different within commercial organisations and a school. Obviously, we've mentioned 100% non-exec. Most commercial boards have executive directors, and there aren't any with a school. The other one, next thing, which is really, really important, is that, of course, governors are not paid, and the directors of commercial companies are paid. And not only are they not paid, but actually neither the governors nor indeed the staff have any financial interest. You know, they don't own shares in the business. They're not sharing in the profitability. You know, it's actually sort of very, very different. That sort of financial thing is slightly different. And you can argue as well. I mean, I know a lot of financial services companies feel very regulated. But, you know, frankly, being chair of governors of a girls' school, I've discovered regulation and inspection in spades. You know, I mean, it makes what the FCA do almost look tame, I think. And you know, there's just the scale of it. You know, the safeguarding policy that you have is just a breathtaking document. And now we've got an online safety policy that's as big as the safeguarding policy. So, you know, one of my governors is the IT and online safety governor, and then the safeguarding governor is somebody different. Now, the safeguarding governor takes an interest in online, and the online takes an interest in the rest of safety, because all governors have got a responsibility for safeguarding, and actually they've all got a responsibility for online safety. So it's just sort of interesting in that sense. And I think the final one that I think is important is that when I was working for the global investment management company I worked for, you almost never saw a non-executive director. Almost never saw them. They never came around the office. They never came and talked to people on the ground. They might talk to the head of the department or whatever, who might come to board meetings and make presentations, but they don't actually get out and about. Governors, if they're doing their job properly, get out and about around the school. They go and ask questions. They talk to people. I mean, I insist all the governors at Queenswood do at least one governor day a year, where they go into the school for the whole day and they look randomly at different things. They observe lessons, but they go and talk to the finance team or the marketing team or the estates team, or the SEND specialists or whatever it might be. When I was my last governor's day, I was looking at the bins and seeing how that was properly managed, and how there wasn't there's going to be problems with that. So you can look at all these different things. So governance days makes the governors actually need to be slightly more at the coalface, just knowing what's going on, not interfering, just going, seeing it, and asking questions to satisfy yourself that the school aims are being properly achieved. So that would be my sort of comment on the two. I suppose the final point I'd make is that with schools, I mean, with commercial companies, 10 years is a really big thing. You should do 9 years and that's it. In a commercial company, I'm less sensitive about that in a school environment where everybody's voluntary. And I'm more interested in whether people are adding value. Are you making a difference? And whatever I do on a pro bono basis, I constantly ask myself, am I making a difference in doing this voluntary work? And if I'm not, that's the time to go. And you should be constantly looking at it. So I'm less concerned. I don't think the sort of 9-year rule really applies in schools. That's just my view. But others may have a different view. But it is a voluntary role.
Yes, it's very impressive to think that you and other school governors really are doing this with a very strong vocational urge, that it is about making a difference and putting something back into education, and you're not paid. And it's interesting what you said about the often lack of visibility of non-executive directors in companies. And I'm just mindful of a report that's been published fairly recently called Roads to Ruin, where some big companies have gone down the pan because their non-executive directors generally haven't asked the questions. They haven't been there. They haven't followed up tenaciously on the things that their CEO was doing. So, but interestingly, that of course non-executive directors are paid, and are paid quite a lot. So, there's a question that's been rumbling on probably for decades: should governors be paid, or should chairs of governors be paid?
Well,
and
the answer
might be wondering, should the chairs of multi-academy trusts be paid?
And my answer is an emphatic no.
No.
And the reason it's an emphatic no is because I think if you started paying governors, it begs a number of rather difficult questions. The first is, who actually pays them? Now, clearly in an independent school, that's fairly easy. But it's not quite so easy in the state system where budgets are tight and everything else. So where will the money come from to pay for these people? And then who do they answer to? I mean, if someone's paying them, who's the boss? Who's the person sort of doing their appraisal? And anyway, who's the person who appoints them? So who's appointing? Who's appraising? Who's sort of making them accountable? Praising their performance. I think it begs a lot of questions. I think as a chair who doesn't get paid, I'm able completely independently to stand back and take a dispassionate view of what the head teacher and the senior leadership are planning to do, want to do within the school. And, I can advise, guide, question, or whatever. I'm very, very emphatic. We don't tell the headmistress or any of the seniors what they should do. We give advice if we're asked for it, and we critique what they put to us. But we're very clear, this is their school, they're running it. We're just here, as we're discussing today, to do the governance. And I think the final point I'd make on this pay issue is, in my view, Anne, it ain't broke. So why fix it? It ain't broke. Sometimes people say to me, oh, well, the problem, James, is there aren't enough people out there who want to be governors. I happen to know that there are loads of people who just want to be asked. They don't like volunteering. But if you go and ask them, and say, would you do this? It's amazing how many people will say yes. So the issue's not there aren't enough people to be governors, there just aren't enough people being asked to be governors. And that's a lesson for governors, I think, particularly in state schools, is they need to actually think about, if they need somebody with a legal background, well, you know, look up who's the partner of the local legal firm in the high street, and then go around and see him and say, you know, or her, say, you know, would you like to be a governor? You know, we're really interested. And it's surprising. If you ask people, they'll do it.
Mm-hmm. I think Emma might have some things to say on that when she comes in agreement with your points, James, actually. I think we can open up. Are there any questions from other attendees for James? David?
Yeah, thanks for that, James. That's a really useful combination across the sectors and across the different bits of governance. The point I want to bring up, I want to link what you said about the importance of pupils with the responsibility of schools to enable their pupils to become responsible citizens. All right. And I want to pose a question around governance. Now, most of you know that I come from a university background. And we have a situation where students are in membership of the governing body. And although there was a lot of nervousness around that at the start, in most cases, that's turned out to be a thoroughly good thing. And when you look at the new ministers, a number of those have started life in their governing positions as governors of universities, as students. Now, with children under the age of majority, there are particular issues. But I happen to know that most schools now have some sort of student council, which is operated in a sort of properly regulated stroke governed way, with the student voice being articulated to the head and to the governors. And I know there are some situations where school councils are given budgets that they use responsibly. And I want to suggest, last week, some 60% of the population, sorry, from 40% of the population didn't vote. And I think we, as schools, have a responsibility to help them to become responsible citizens. And so my question for us to think about is, what more can we do to enable students to become involved in the governance of our schools? One or two things I know go on. Students appear for a bit of a governing council meeting once a year in some places. There are reports come through, the student voice comes through. But what more can we do to inspire students to become responsible citizens through being involved in governance?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I talked about pupil voice and how important pupil voice was. And, you know, at Queenswood, there's a school council and the Board of Governors hears what went on, you know, what's being discussed, what the issues are. And we've been very pleased with is that there's quite a lot of messaging back going from the staff back to the students round the school. So you know in the canteen area, you know, there will be signs up saying, "You said this, we did that."
Right.
To show that the pupil voice has been heard, and I think that's really important. I think there are difficulties with having students at secondary schools on boards of governors. I think that's a bridge too far. And also, I'm a little uncomfortable about how that sort of bypasses the teachers, because, you know, we're a non-exec, and if we start talking directly, is how easy is that? We do talk to the students. I mean, in my last Governor's Day, you know, I had lunch with a crowd of year 7s and 8s, you know, and it was really interesting. I mean, I had to tease out of them some of the issues because they just sort of sat there slightly in awe. But you know, it was interesting to have the conversation, and they do have views. And you know, once they settle and feel comfortable, they'll tell you what their views are. They'll say how much they dislike the uniform, or you know, this bit of the way the school operates they don't like, or the toilets in that particular building are totally disgusting. You know, it's absolutely, so they will give you that feedback. So it is helpful. I think that, you know, the key thing is, as governors, is we need to make sure that the head teacher and the senior leadership team are seeking pupil voice and are acting on what they hear when they get that feedback, and that they're not trying to close it down, they're not trying to stop them making comments, or they're ignoring the comments that have been made. I think that's what we governors need to do. And that's a good relationship then between the students and the teachers, which is what we want to see. And I think that the students will, you know, certainly at Queenswood have got very encouraged, because they've realised if they do say something, they get an answer. Whether it's positive or negative, they get an answer. And I think that's you know, and a reason why. And I think Jo touched on that in her little podcast. So that's my view.
David, do you want to come back on that?
I think that's right. And I love your idea of I love your bringing out the two-way conversation. I mean, that's helping to bring trust and confidence. I mean, I think I'd, in an ideal world, try and take it a bit further. I mean, here we are in schools working on development plans. One of the things that's worked in universities is where you have a sort of slice of people through the organisation, including students, working on particular development issues.
Well,
and
that does happen. That does happen. When we refurbished the sixth form centre at Queenswood, when the property facilities governor went in to look at the proposed plans for the sixth form centre, they'd already gone through the students, and changes had been made because of what the students had said. And you know, he took the opportunity to talk to some of the year 11s and the year 12s that were there at the time to say, well, you know, how do you feel about this and that? And they majorly influenced the way it finally looked. And I think that was you know, really positive. I mean, the key thing they all wanted was a coffee shop, so they got one.
I do want to jump in, but I've got an example I could share of something we do at our trust, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to ask Emma if you'd got any examples of this, and actually to transfer on to you to see if you've got any feedback on various things that James dealt with. So there's just to feed back to you a list of things I think you might be interested in commenting on. So it's there's about student governors, about skills-based governors, about asking people to be governors, about the number of vacancies of governors,
Yeah.
and the number of governors placed. Because you're in, as executive of governors for schools, you're in a pretty strong position just to feed back a little on all of those.
Yes, I hope so. Thank you very much. I think that's a really interesting question, David. I think let's pick up on that, and then we'll kind of address some of the other bits, if that's okay. One thing we do at our trust, so Southend East Community Academy Trust, or CCAT for short, is that each of the schools, so there's 6 schools in our trust, and each of them have a couple of pupil advocates. That's what they call pupil advocates. And once a term, the pupil advocates, a small group of pupils from each school, come together to the trust kind of headquarters, the trust office, because we're very fortunate, our schools are very close together. And they meet with the CEO and some of the trustees, And it's their opportunity to kind of say, well, we're bringing some of the thoughts and the views from the pupils at our school, and we're sharing them with these various layers of governance and leadership. And that's a really nice chance to hear that pupil voice. And again, something that James has kind of picked up, really important to do that kind of, you said, we did. So we have something very similar where kind of, you know, you said this, here's our display, here's how it's going, so that pupils then back at the schools also get a sense of what's happening. So, for example, some of the pupils wanted more of a focus on wellbeing. That led to us developing a trust-wide wellbeing charter with different aspects of wellbeing and, you know, suggestions for things that pupils and staff could do to take care of their wellbeing. And actually that's been implemented really positively. So that's been a really nice thing. And I think the other thing as well that I think has kind of worked quite well, I think is really nice, is when we had the big help out, it was kind of part of King Charles's kind of coronation celebrations and things. Something we did at Governors for Schools is we prepared a kind of presentation pack that governors could use to go into their schools and explain to all of the pupils, well, I'm a governor and this is what I do and that's what this means. And actually that was a really nice way to explain that, because as James said, we want governors in schools and being visible, but actually it's not always clear, I think, to the pupils what governors actually do and what their role and their purpose is. So that's quite a nice thing that I think, you know, we would always encourage people to do and get involved in.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's excellent. So we're already seeing that there are, what you're going to tell us about a little bit later, similarities between a multi-academy trust and an independent school. Did you want to say anything about skills-based
Yes.
governors?
Absolutely. I would absolutely completely agree with James whenever we're looking at supporting schools, because one of the things, if you don't know, that Governors for Schools do is we work with school and trust boards and help them find skilled people that they need. And we always suggest that the first thing they do, if they've got vacancies, we'll look at the skills that you do have, look at those particular areas that you don't have, so you know, if you're looking for someone, what it is you would like them to bring to the table in terms of their particular experience. Again, we're also really encouraging boards to think about diversifying the governors that they have on their boards in lots of different ways. So, you know, perhaps not just professionally, you know, age, gender, background, lots and lots of different things. One of the very kind of shocking statistics I think I've heard recently was only 3% or something of governors who are under 30, which is an incredibly small number. But actually, it's really important to have those diverse voices, people who perhaps have more recent experience of entering the workplace, going through further education, that kind of thing. There's such an important need to have those different perspectives and skills coming together. So actually you are considering different views, different options, and getting kind of different takes on things. So that's absolutely something that we think is fantastic, skills audits, and something that when we work with the schools, we say, well, tell us what it is you need, and that's going to help us find the right person. And we do lots of work with different organisations to find people who can bring finance or marketing or legal or whatever kind of skills it might be onto the board. So that's definitely very important. I think we are always doing what we can to promote governance. And I think James has got a really good point about asking people and the strength of word of mouth, because that's a really great way to get people involved in governance. Found lots of people don't really know what governors do, and they kind of think the role is a bit mysterious, or there are lots of common misconceptions, like you have to be an expert in education, or you have to have children who attend that school. And actually, those things aren't true. Just as James was saying, you need people with lots of different skills who come from different backgrounds, business, all these different things, actually to support, you know, the education experts who are in school. And when I started as a governor, I didn't have any children. I do now, and often people think, oh, you know, I'm not a parent, I can't do it. Actually, parents contribute so much, they have really valuable views, but so do other people who perhaps don't have children in that school or don't have children at all. And it's something that I think, you know, we want to kind of dispel that myth, and we want to try and encourage people to get involved in governance, because it's such a wonderful thing to give back to, and it's such a fantastic way to learn. You know, you develop all kinds of skills. Even though I've been a governor for, you know, a trustee for a while, I'm still learning every meeting, every event we go to. There's always something new to learn. I think it's a fantastic way to develop yourself as well as give something back. So we should really be encouraging people who are looking for, you know, a challenge. How can I do something a bit different? But governance is a fantastic way to do it, because we've got lots and lots of schools out there who really need people. And I love the idea of going out and saying, yep, you know, we need you, get involved. And that's a lot of the work that we do. But we would certainly encourage everyone to kind of think, well, actually, you know, how can I get involved in governance? How can I support? How can I encourage other people to bring their skills to the table?
Mm. I know that you often do have the statistic at your fingertips as to how many vacancies there are in state schools at the moment. Do you know what it's usually huge?
Yes, absolutely huge. I don't have it
Hundreds of
at the moment. It's completely gone out of my head, but it's a huge number.
It's
Lots.
usually hundreds of thousands, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah, absolutely.
You're filling those with placing several thousand a year. So
We're very fortunate in the work that we're able to do and to kind of be increasing those numbers, but there are still more vacancies than we're able to fill, particularly in places that are very rural. That can be very difficult, especially, you know, where certain skills in particular are needed. So there's always more that we can do when it comes to filling those vacancies.
well, it's astonishing the level of agreement between you two. And Emma now is going to segue very nicely into telling us about being the vice chair of a multi-academy trust. And we've heard there are 6 schools in this academy. And James may want to come back with some questions on that afterwards. So over to you, Emma.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And I will say, although I'll try not to repeat all of the things that James has said, lots of the things that I'll say reiterate it or kind of complement it or absolutely support it, because there is so much overlap. So that's me. I'm vice chair of CCAP, but I'm also the impact and projects manager at Governors for Schools. So I just love a bit of governance. What can I say?
Yeah.
And I thought it might be helpful, first of all, when we talk about an academy trust, to think about what that structure looks like, because not everyone is familiar with this. So in terms of those levels of governance, so I've got my members here up at the top of my kind of governance structure there. And members are often described as a bit like shareholders in a company, although there is no financial benefit, just as James said, but governors don't get paid in kind of state schools academy trusts. The members' role is often described as very eyes on, but hands off. And those members only tend to meet maybe a couple of times a year, not as frequently as the trustees. And it's their role to kind of hold the trustees to account, to appoint the trustees, to appoint external auditors, because obviously everything needs to be audited and checked to make sure it's all compliant, and making any changes to the articles of association. So all of those documents that help kind of make up the structure of the trust. So reporting to those members is the trust board, and that's where I sit. So I'm vice chair of the trust board, and the trust board is able to delegate certain things to trust board committees. So all trust boards are required to have a committee that deals with the audit and risk side of things. That's why on the left-hand side of my pitch there, I've got audit and risk. So those are all the kind of financial things, making sure that all of those regulations are maintained. So that's a committee made up of some of the members of the trust board. There will typically be one or more committees that deal with other matters. So something that perhaps might be a little bit more pupil focused, like education outcomes, that kind of thing. So although there's some flexibility for academy trusts in how they structure themselves, they will have to have an audit and risk committee. They do have to have something to make sure that finance is going through the right processes, that they're accountable in that way. But they do have some flexibility with the other structures. So typically what you would find in an academy trust is reporting into that trust board. You've got each school that sits underneath that academy trust, and each of those schools will have their own local layer of governance. So a board of governors, here I've called them a local academy committee, because that's a term that's very commonly used in an academy trust. And each of those local boards are made up of governors who do a relatively similar job to kind of any school governor, in that they're looking at what's going on in that school. They're particularly focused on just that school and what's going on in it. So each of those local boards will then report into that trust board that's overseeing all of those schools and all of those boards. Does that all sound okay and it all makes sense so far? I hope so. So that's a relatively kind of typical structure for an academy trust, but I'm going to show you now how we do it at CCAT, so you can kind of see where it makes sense. You've lots and lots of boxes we've got here. So you can see we've got our trust members up at the top. Reporting into the members, we've got the trust board. Again, that's where I sit as a trustee. And that trust board is able to delegate certain functions to different committees. So we have our audit, risk and resources committee, as we must, that deals with lots of elements like the finance and the risk. But we also have a curriculum and pupil matters committee. So that focuses more on education outcomes, pupil well-being, that sort of thing. And it just means that those committees then can focus a little bit more on their individual remit in a bit more depth than they're able to at a full trust board meeting. So I still attend meetings with all of the trustees as a trust board, and we talk about lots of different things, but I also sit on one of the committees. I sit on the Curriculum and Pupil Matters committee, and it just gives us the opportunity. We're a smaller group of trustees made up of trustees from the trust board, and it just gives us the opportunity to dig into some of those issues in a little bit more detail. So the CEO, the COO, again, job titles and things that we've heard elsewhere, reporting into that trust board. And we've decided at our trust that we need particular roles like a director of education, a director of people, because that's what we needed. They report into our CEO. Our head teachers at those schools report into the CEO. And we've then got our academy committees working each of the schools. And they work with the head teachers reporting into the CEOs, and all of the things that they do feed up to the trust board. So as we've got our local governors going into each of their schools, when they write up their visit report after they've been in, that comes up to the trust board. So we have oversight of what's going on there. Also got our governance professional. She's amazing. Our governance manager does lots of things, works with all the layers of governance and really helps keep us on top of things and doing what we should do. And she's fab. And she's got an administrative assistant as well that makes such a huge difference when it comes to organising all of this, because as you can see, there's lots of spokes and lots of arms. Hope that's all okay. Is that all making sense so far? Lovely. So I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the requirements for an academy trustee. So because academy trusts are both kind of a charity and a company in the way that they're set up, that means the trustees of that trust are both charity trustees and company directors, and therefore they've got to comply with the charitable objectives for the trust, making sure that all of those things are being met, company and charity law, and that any contractual obligations that come with the funding agreement from the Education Skills Funding Agency are all kind of being met. So there are statutory legal duties that trustees must make sure that they're complying with, but there is support to manage that as a trustee. So our governance professional, for example, will give us some support with this. In terms of the purpose of the board, I think lots of this is going to kind of support and reiterate with lots of James's messages. So strategic leadership of the Academy Trust is a big responsibility for the board. So it's really important that the trust board sets the vision for the trust. So what is it we want the trust and the schools in the trust to achieve? What do we want things to look like? And it's got to support the charitable objectives that the trust was set up with. So again, thinking about the vision, the values, the ethos, how can we make sure that all of that is working kind of towards, and we've got a clear vision for what we want to kind of get to at the end. Thinking about setting and kind of supporting the trust's culture. So again, what James was saying about kind of those important messages coming down from the top, it's important as a trust board that we're setting the culture, the environment, and kind of fostering that in the way that we want it to operate across the trust and across the schools. So that's a really important thing that we can do as trustees to make sure we're being consistent in that messaging. So setting and championing the strategy is another really important thing. We need to be clear about, okay, if this is our vision and this is where we want to go, what's our plan for how to get there? How are we going to make sure that we communicate that in a way that everyone understands? How can we do it in a way that everyone can buy into and find accessible? How can we champion that across our school communities? That includes setting our governance structure. So there is a little bit more flexibility with Academy Trusts about which things we can choose to delegate, who has responsibilities at which kind of level of the governance. So it's important for us as a trust to think about, okay, how do we set all of those things out so it works for us? So for example, we've made some changes recently to our scheme of delegation that sets out who is responsible for which kind of decisions and things at certain levels, just so we can make sure it was working for our school's context. I think it's really important, like we were saying, to be really on top of that and to be prepared to review and reflect when things need to change. Accountability and assurance, again, obviously another really important part of the trustee role. So having oversight of that operational performance, again, it doesn't mean, just as James was saying, we don't go in and we don't kind of get involved in all of the day-to-day bits and pieces and kind of doing all of that. We don't want to get too involved in the operational, because we need to remember that the trustee role is a strategic one. But we still need to know what's going on and have that understanding so that we can hold the right people to account and make sure that we're providing that effective challenge in the right way. Again, part of that is making sure that there's effective financial performance. So making sure that we're seeking value for money, making sure that the right kind of decisions are made, making sure that processes have been followed in the right way. So we're being compliant with things like procurement, for example. Estate maintenance, another important responsibility of Academy Trusts, because when we take those buildings and those sites over, that then becomes Academy Trust responsibility to maintain. So really making sure that all of those things are looked after and that we're planning for that, especially when it comes to finance. And I've also put safeguarding in there because in terms of the statutory monitoring, it's kind of the trustees that, there's certain checks and monitoring things that we would do at the trust board level to monitor that. But just as James said, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. So even though we've said to our governors, we'll take care of doing certain safeguarding checks and things, it's everyone's responsibility still. If you see something that's not right, to follow the right processes, to report it, to say something. So everyone is involved in that core responsibility. Engagement, I think that's one of the nicest things actually about being a trustee. So again, a lot of this picks up on some of those points that we finished in kind of James' bit, all about having that strategic oversight of stakeholder relations. So understanding the needs of those different stakeholders that you have in your school community. So obviously you've got parents, pupils, staff, lots and lots of people thinking, okay, how are we making sure that we are engaging with everyone, that we're making sure that people have an opportunity to share their voice, making sure that we're trying to hear from perhaps some members of the school community who don't always kind of share their views. Well, how can we try and encourage them to participate and to join in? We really want to make those schools a really core part of the community. So that community engagement, wanting to think, okay, how can we help the school to be at the heart of the community? How can we do that? What can we do to work with the community to kind of foster that feeling? That's a really nice part of being a trustee. And again, that's where knowing the school community, knowing the context adds so much value, because it means then that you can really do that in an effective way. Forging connections is a fantastic way that trustees can really contribute something to the schools and to the trust. So in terms of forging connections, this goes quite nicely back to what James was saying. If you need someone with law experience, reach out to them. Well, actually, as a trustee, if you've got connections with local businesses, certain industries, certain sectors, it's a fantastic way to be able to bring that into school. So, for example, some of the things that we've done, we've had local employers do a kind of practice job interviews and preparation with some of our secondary school students, looking at opportunities for work experience, that kind of thing. All sounding okay so far? Great. So in terms of some of the things that I actually do as a trustee, there is a lot of overlap here with someone that would do on any kind of governing board of a school, I think. So I still read papers and prepare for the meetings, all the documents we're going to discuss. I get those, I make sure I'm prepared for those meetings. I attend full trust board meetings and committee meetings to provide that effective challenge and holding our trust leaders to account. I still go out and visit the schools and make sure that I'm speaking with staff and pupils and parents and you know, having those opportunities to capture that stakeholder voice. Meeting with Ofsted inspectors when we get inspections, that's something I did recently. And that's a really important thing because they are looking at the strength of governance as well when they're making those judgments. Really getting involved in helping to set and champion that strategic direction and vision, making sure that we're all working together, those schools and the trust, to kind of deliver that for our pupils. And really wanting to champion the school's success within the community. So again, you know, one of our schools that recently had Ofsted, there was some really fantastic work that they've been doing and that was recognised during that inspection. So one of the things we want to do is making sure that we're really spreading that message in the community and making sure that the school is really recognised for all their fantastic work, which is one of the nicest things I think to do as a governor, to say nice things about your school. But there are some things that are a little bit different at that trust board level, as opposed to when you're kind of on that local level, focusing just on one school. So I thought it might be helpful to talk through some of those. So I'm going to start with my kind of top left speech bubble. Thinking about how we can make sure each school is given the resource it needs to thrive. So obviously, in terms of funding and things, we get that money in, but there are certain important decisions to be made about, okay, how can we look at what all of the schools need? How can we make sure that our resource, our capacity is delivered to those schools in an equitable way that gives everybody what they need? Again, thinking how can we make sure that all of those schools are able to work together to address their own individual priorities, but still being a part of that trust vision and a trust strategy. So bringing all of those things together, thinking about how they complement each other, how they feed into each other. That's a really important point of discussion. Making sure that we can achieve value for all of our schools by working together. So one of the benefits of an academy trust is opportunities for economies of scale and looking at how we can benefit in that way. I'm thinking, okay, how can we make that work so that we can absolutely maximise our resource and make sure it works as well as possible for everybody. So I think that I'm going to go to my bottom left now. And this one for me, I think is a really big talking point. I think it's a really key thing and something we'll always keep working on, because I think there's always something to consider and reflect on and review. And it's how we can balance ensuring there's consistency and a shared kind of culture across the trust, but still having the schools have an opportunity to have their own individuality and autonomy. I think that's something that actually I'm quite proud of that we do as a trust. As I say, we'll always keep working on it because we really want to try and get that balance as right as we can. But thinking, how can we still make schools feel as though they are empowered to make their own decisions and to do the things that they need to do, but still ensuring that there's consistency where we need there to be across the trust. Where we've got obviously multiple schools, we've got 6 schools in our trust, thinking if we make this decision and do this activity at this school, what might the impact be perhaps on another school? So if we decide to spend a certain pot of money developing something at this school, what is that going to mean for the other schools? So needing to kind of really think about that as a group and saying, okay, how can we make sure that everyone is kind of getting what they need? One of the really nice things I think we can do as a trust is look at how we can facilitate some of that peer learning. So it's a great way to say, okay, well, actually, we've got this amazing resource of people across these schools. How can we make it work so we can bring them together and help them learn from each other? And I think that's a really nice way to look at supporting that individual professional development, which leads me quite nicely onto my, oh no, I've gone too far. There we go. Onto my next lot of speech bubbles. And I'm going to go for my top right this time about how can we kind of utilise and develop staff across the trust. So that's been a really nice way, actually, working as a trust to support retention. And we're thinking about recruitment and retention, because we had a member of staff went off on maternity leave, and we were able to move another member of staff into that role in the interim to help them develop some leadership and management experience that they perhaps wouldn't have had that opportunity to do without leaving the school, without leaving the trust, without leaving the area potentially. So that was a really nice way to say, well, actually, we can provide you with that development opportunity, and we can support you using, you know, what we've got inside the trust. And that's just a really fantastic way to kind of develop people who are you know, really, really valuable to the trust. It's a great opportunity to think about how we can meet a very diverse set of needs for our children and young people. So in our trust, we have, as I say, 6 schools, and they're all within 2 miles of each other. So they're very close. Despite that, some of our schools are incredibly different. We have some schools that are in very, very affluent areas, and some schools very nearby who are in really quite deprived areas. And so they have very different needs. And it's thinking, okay, how can we collectively as a trust implement our strategy so it supports all of those different communities and gives them what they need? Part of that, thinking about our governance structure and how can we make sure that that works best for the schools so it delivers what people need and is right for that school context. We're very fortunate we have a secondary school. Most of our schools are primary phase, but we do have a secondary. And it's a really good opportunity for us to think about how we can support our children and young people during what is often a very difficult time, that transition between schools, and thinking how can we bring that learning together. So one thing we've done is we supported our secondary teachers to be able to go into the primary schools and get a sense of what the learning is like there, the environment, the children who are coming up, where their kind of skills and needs are, and likewise sending our primary teachers into the secondary school so they've got a clearer view of where is it that those children and young people are going. And that was really nice to be able to kind of help support all of that, because we thought it was such a valuable learning opportunity. Thinking about how we manage funding for capital projects in a fair way. All of those schools are very different. They're all in a very different condition, and they need different parts of things, you know, sprucing up and maintaining and managing. And how can we do it in a kind of equitable way that works for everyone, that makes sure all of those schools are still getting that support that they need. And something that I think is generally a sector-wide kind of issue, I think, you know, you might know about this, but generally pupil numbers are falling, birth rates are falling. So over time, we're seeing fewer and fewer pupils coming into schools. And because of the way that schools are funded in the state schools, where it's by numbers, so it depends on the number of pupils you have as to how much money you get, that's a real concern, because obviously we want our schools to be as full as possible, so we have as much budget as possible to support them with. And it's thinking, okay, well, how can we look at how that works across all of our schools? So actually, if we've got a very, very full school over here, what might that mean for the school down the road who might have reduced numbers? What does that mean for our staffing, potential redundancy, that kind of thing? So lots of things that, you know, we really have to consider in terms of how all of those schools come together. How does that all sound? I hope that's all okay. The couple of other things, some of the kind of the challenges and the benefits maybe of being a trustee versus kind of a local school governor. There being more schools, that is more time that I spend on visits, and I'm very fortunate. I work for a lovely organisation that are very, very supportive of school governance, as you would expect, and so they're very supportive of that time. But I do need to think carefully about, okay, I have a certain proportion of time that I can dedicate to governance. How can I share that across those schools? It does take longer to build up certain relationships and knowledge of that school, because that's not the only school that you're kind of focusing on. You know, it takes time to learn all of that for multiple schools, and it's, you know, that can like cause its own challenges sometimes. In terms of the data and the headlines, there is more to look at and to review and to analyse and to assess, because there are more schools. So that is certainly something that kind of keeps us busy, and we've got great support from the trust to kind of make that manageable, but it's more kind of stuff to kind of know and familiarise yourself with. And even as a local school governor, you can't always keep all of your stakeholders happy, unfortunately, but the more schools you have, the more stakeholders you have, that's potentially a bigger group of people that you're kind of thinking, oh, how can I make sure I'm meeting those needs? All of that said, there is something really fantastic about being a trustee and knowing that actually sitting at that particular level, you have the power to make real change and make important decisions for the trust, the direction of the trust, and how things will work out for those school communities. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to do that, and to do it on such a wide scale. It's really great to look at how we can take those benefits of working as a trust and use that to do things that I wouldn't be able to do as a school governor in one individual school. So we have a central team of people that manage things. We have a central IT team, and we're really fortunate we have a central estates team. So actually we have a team of people who can go out and do our building work and take care of things and all of that stuff. And it's access to that is something we would not have if we weren't part of a trust. And that's really great to see the power of an academy trust coming together and us utilising those opportunities to make our school communities the best that they can be. Like I said before, it's fantastic to give people opportunities for retention and development, because we've got peer learning and cross working that we can have for staff. So that's really great as well. I love that. And there's so many children and young people that we can be helping. It's fantastic to feel like you're making a positive difference and doing something really positive for that community, and to be able to do it for lots of schools worth of children and families is really wonderful. So if anyone is wondering about becoming a trustee and thinking whether it's something that is for them, we do have a service at Governors for Schools called the Trustee Recruitment Service, and I put the web address they're happy to share all these slides that can be shared with people afterwards as well. And the Trustee Recruitment Service goes into more detail about the role and the kind of skills that you can really bring to that. But as we were saying before, so important to have a huge range of skills. So there's always something that someone is able to offer, whether it's professional, personal, just lived experience. There's so much to offer there. And that recruitment service can support you in terms of finding an academy trust that needs those skills. We also have a free piece of online learning that you can find on the Governors for Schools website on our e-learning section that's all about becoming a trustee. So it goes into the role in a little bit more detail about the requirements, the kind of skills that are really useful, the kind of things that you're asked to do. And it's just a really good way to kind of go, okay, well, I'll do this little bit of online learning, get more of a sense of what that role and whether it's for me. So anyone can access that tool. That's completely free and open for everyone. So I think that's a great thing. One of the things that we're also starting at Governors for Schools is an opportunity called Pathway to Trusteeship. And it's essentially an opportunity to prepare people for the role before they get started and join a trust board. So there's plenty of online learning to help people understand all the education bits that, it's really helpful to know as a governor, and things about the sector, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on in education. That's all fantastic, can be completed at their own pace. I think my favourite thing about this programme, though, is that you have opportunities to practice being a trustee at a trust board meeting. So we have a kind of trust board meeting simulation. You have someone who is acting as the CEO of the trust, someone who acts as the chair of the trust board, and participants come along and they act as a trustee along with other people in the programme acting as a trustee, and they have meeting paperwork to prepare, and then they present that challenge to the CEO, and it's like having a practice really, and getting to try out being a trustee before they then actually join a board, so people have more of a sense of what to expect. And I think that's a really great way to do it. Anyone who's interested in kind of being a governor at a local level, maybe focusing a bit more on one particular school, so much information on the Governors for Schools website. I would really urge people to have a look and to get in touch. Talking of which, happy to take any questions. And those are my contact details. If anyone has any questions now, later, you know, something maybe occurs to you later and you think, oh, I would really love to know about this, I'm happy for anyone to get in touch with any questions at all, whether it's a Governors for Schools thing or a general trustee thing or a general governance thing. I would happily talk about governance all day long. So my details are there, both my work one and my trust email. Anyone can get in touch. I hope that's helpful, and I would be very happy to take any questions.
Well, Emma, that's wonderful. Your enthusiasm is palpable. It's just so clear in the way you're speaking about your role, and it's also really very interesting to see how similar what you're saying about being on a trust board is with what James talked about being on a chair of a governing body in the independent sector, because there is that bottom line accountability, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Particularly, you talked about being on the trust board of 6 schools, and I'm just thinking that some of these multi-academy trusts are huge, aren't they? They have 60 schools, 70 schools, 120 schools. I mean, they are massive businesses.
Absolutely, and I think that's why I'm very fortunate in that I can go in and visit our schools. But obviously, if you've got schools all over the country,
Yes.
that makes that a very different kind of experience. And there's still that level of accountability and wanting to know the key headlines for those schools.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a very different thing when it's a big trust.
Yes, I was going to ask you about, it looked as though there are 2 levels of governance really with the Multi-Academy Trust, and there are those local governing committees.
Yes.
And how do you identify, if you have a volunteer, as to which level you recommend them to go into?
I think part of it is around their particular interests. So whether someone has a particular focus, they really want to support that particular school, there's maybe something about that school, you know, that perhaps they attended there or their children were there or something, a certain attachment, and they really just want to do that, or whether they would feel more comfortable working with a wider group of schools. But I also think it's a lot to do with their experiences as well. And I would say everyone has something to offer to governance, even if they don't realise it, even if they are someone who is relatively early on in their career. Even lived experience can be incredibly valuable. But there are certain expectations about the kind of challenge that you can present, the kind of confidence that you might need to have to be on a trust board, certain experiences professionally that perhaps could really benefit you. So if you've had a bit more kind of managerial leadership type experience, that you might feel more comfortable going straight into a trust board position, whereas actually someone who perhaps doesn't have as much of that experience might want to develop it a little bit more on a local board first before they then consider trusteeship.
We've got such a small amount of time left because we've dealt with such a lot of really interesting material, but does anyone want to ask Emma anything specific, or James, do you want to come back on anything?
No, I don't think I would come back on anything. I mean, I'm deeply grateful I'm not on the board of a multi-academy trust with all those schools, because I think, you know, focusing on one school, I find takes an awful lot of my time. You know, to try and get on top of a whole range of schools, I think is really, really very difficult. I think the one thing that I would ask Emma, because I just think it's so important, is this whole question of accountability. Is that, you know, clearly you've got the underlying governing bodies for each of the schools that are being held to account by the Multi-Academy Trust main board, but who's holding the Multi-Academy main trust board to account? And you know, what if there is conflict between the underlying schools who actually may have a different view, a different ethos or value that they want to follow or feel is right for their students? I mean, how do you deal with the sort of conflicts that will appear in a sort of multi-academy arrangement that doesn't appear in a single school?
He's spotted the problem, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
Spotted it.
I think that is one of the most fundamental challenges and difficulties being part of an academy trust, thinking, well, actually, how can we try and make it work for everyone? So in terms of accountability, we've got that level of the members and the trust board reporting to those, and there is an element of accountability there, and accountability to the regional directors in terms of, you know, our compliance and making sure that academy trusts are doing the things they should. I think it will always be a continual journey of communication and learning how to work together between the trust board and the schools. And that's why I say it's something I think we're good at, but never perfect, in terms of how we can let schools still have their own individuality, but still do things in the trust way when we need that to happen. So I think having clear lines of communication and lots of opportunities for the trust board and the CEO to work with those head teachers, to keep them involved, to bring them on board, is really important. So it's not a, we're doing this to you, we're working with you, we want to hear what you say, how is it going to work for you, how can we support you? So one of the things that we've been talking about recently is thinking about all of our schools as individuals, but how we would like to describe them as being empowered by CCAT. So all of the schools are doing fantastic things, and they're doing the things that they know they need to for their school communities. But as the trust, we're the facilitator, the supporter that's enabling that to happen in all of those school communities. Like I say, I don't think we've got it completely now. We'll keep working on it. But yeah, that is the real challenge, I think, with academy trusts. I'm sorry we're going to have to stop, because I don't know if we'll be cut off, but our time is over. I think it's been a really interesting and exciting session, because it hasn't just been two presentations, it's been an interactive conversation. And the way in which you two have worked together has been particularly good and interesting. So thank you so much, Emma and James.